Hello Brighouse High School and welcome to this online GCSE PE tutorial, which today is going to be focusing on methods of training. Methods of training are the different forms of training that we can do to improve specific components of fitness to therefore ultimately improve performance in your chosen sport. So over the series or course of this tutorial, what we're going to be looking at the different methods of training and the different fitness classes which can be used to improve performance. We're going to explain which method or which fitness class is best suited to improving specific components of fitness. And lastly, we're going to look at the pros and cons of each method of training and each fitness class. Now, as you've probably heard me say there, we have different forms of training and different fitness classes, and it's important we know the difference between the two. So when we're talking about methods of training, we're talking about 6 methods, which include resistance training, interval training, plyometric, continuous, fartlek and circuit. And the easiest way to try and remember these 6 methods is the analogy rest in peace Chelsea Football Club, or RIP CFC. We also have fitness classes, and we need to have a knowledge of 5 different fitness classes, which are Pilates, body pump, aerobics, yoga and spinning. And again, an easy way of trying to remember that is if you think about the online site eBay, it's a little bit like that, but it's P-based. Just a really simple way of trying to remember all 6 methods and all 5 fitness classes. Now for the series or the purpose of this online tutorial, we're only going to be looking at the methods, not the fitness classes. That will come on a different online tutorial. So, each method of training and each fitness class is actually responsible for improving a specific component of fitness. So therefore they're appropriate to different athletes, different sports and different positions. And you would, if you were designing your own training program, choose the correct method of training which is suitable for the component you wish to improve on. So we're going to start with resistance training, okay, the R in our RIPCFC. Now, resistance training is a form of interval training where resistance is applied to the body. Now, the resistance can be in form of weight equipment, which is the most traditional form of resistance training. It can be gravity-assisted exercises. It can be using another performer to give that resistance, or other types of equipment where you have to exert a force to overcome that resistance. It often involves the athlete performing either a number of reps or sets, and then you have a break in between those sets in order to recover. This obviously develops the main components of strength, power and muscular endurance. So looking at this in a little bit of closer detail, as we said, weight training is the most traditional form of this, but you can use gravity assisted exercises or body weight exercises, which are known as calisthenics. This is where you simply use your own body weight as the resistance. Things like press-ups, push-ups or pull-ups. Other types of resistance equipment include things like a parachute or weighted running. And lastly, you can even use another performer to provide that resistance, provide that additional weight that you are working against. So various different ways of resistance training. Resistance training, with it being particularly attributed to power and strength and muscular endurance, relates to sports such as shot put, rugby, weightlifting and rowing. Interval training involves the athlete working for intense short periods of time, and then this is either followed by complete rest or low intensity exercise to allow the athlete to recover. This process is then repeated a number of times so that the athlete can work on the same component of fitness over and over again in the same session. Although interval training can be used to develop your aerobic fitness as well as your anaerobic, it is usually designed for those short explosive events, and therefore your anaerobic energy system is the one that's going to benefit most. Just to give you an example of what interval training looks like, if you think about an athlete on a track, maybe working on their sprint technique. So they're going to do a 100-meter sprint, they'll walk back to the beginning, get some rest in, and then they'll repeat that 5 times. You obviously wouldn't do 500-meter sprints back to back without any rest, because then you would start to develop your cardiovascular endurance rather than your speed and acceleration. And as we've discussed before, resistance training is often used with interval training alongside it. So when you're in the gym, you might do 10 reps, you might rest, and then you repeat that 3 times. Again, developing your strength, power, or muscular endurance. Plyometric training involves the athlete bounding or jumping over given obstacles, and it's generally done at really high intensity and short duration. There's breaks between sets to allow recovery, so there's an element of interval training there, and it's all about developing explosive maximal power. A couple of examples of this. Hopefully you're all familiar with what a box jump looks like. So this is all about increasing that lower leg power. So this would be best suited to athletes such as long jumpers, triple jump, high jump, volleyball athletes, or basketball players. Equally though, we can do plyometric training on the upper body. So if you think about a press-up position, trying to get an explosive press-up with a clap in between, this would develop your explosive upper body movement, and that would be great for things like shot put, javelin, or even climbing. We move on to the C of our RIP CFC, and this is continuous training, and it is exactly that. It's exercising at a moderate pace over an extended period of time, generally more than 20 minutes. There's no breaks or rest periods, and as such this develops your cardiovascular endurance as well as your muscular endurance, and therefore the sports it's best suited to are those which pretty much mirror the type of training where you're going to be working for long periods of time, you're going to be working at a moderate pace, and there's no breaks or rest periods. So marathon, long distance running, long distance cycling like the Tour de France or the triathlon. Fartlek training, well, this will be a new one to most of you. Now, fartlek training is actually a type of training which was developed in Sweden, and fartlek means speed play, playing with the speed that you are training at. And this form of training means the athlete does not stop, but they change the pace and the terrain, so the type of ground you're running on, or the elevation you're running on, during the session. It develops cardiovascular endurance and muscular endurance, but it can also encourage speed, power, agility, so it works both your aerobic and anaerobic energy system. Just to give you a bit of an example of this, if we look at this map from fartlek training, each colour represents a different pace that the athlete has to run at. So starting with a jogging pace, going into a short sprint, then into a running pace, then back to a sprint, into a run, back to a jog. So as you can see, completely changing the pace up at different points on that track. Equally, this is a graph of elevation. So if we consider the same athlete starting at the bottom of the graph, they start out with a sprint, going uphill, going then into a run, then into a jog, then back into a run, and then there's a slight downhill as you can see on the graph there. They go into a jog. So again, constantly changing the pace and changing the elevation at which they run at. Now these are best suited to sports where you do constantly change your pace, not necessarily changing the elevation that you're running at, but if you think about these games, you are constantly running, jogging, sprinting, walking, back to sprinting again. So these sports are best suited to fartlek training rather than something like continuous training where it's the same pace. We then come on to circuit training. Now hopefully most of you are familiar with circuit training, which involves you moving around a series of different stations or activities within the same session. This is really good type of training because each station can be specifically designed to improve a particular component fitness. So in one session you might work on all 11 components, or you might work on just 1 or 2 components so that each station is designed to do that particular area of improvement. Circuits can be undertaken on a timed basis, so you might do 30 seconds on a station and move on to the next one, or it can be done on a repetition basis. So you've got to do 12 reps and move on to the next station, do 12 reps and so on. Now depending on what component of fitness you're trying to work on, you can obviously put rest periods in between each station. So if I was working on my cardiovascular endurance, I may remove those rest periods, so I have to work for a long period of time. However, if I was working on more specific like speed or agility, I may put rest periods in between so that I specifically work on those components rather than transitioning to cardiovascular endurance. A couple of examples. So these are more traditional circuits, fitness-based circuits we call these, where people are working on things like strength, power, muscular endurance. But circuit training can also be skill-based. whereas each station works on a particular skill. So we're going to have a couple of little activities here to see how much you've learned over the series of this tutorial. So down the left hand side we have our different methods of training, and on the right hand side we've mixed up the different definitions. Pause the video now and see if you can match up the method of training with the definition. Right, let's see how you did. Then continuous training, as we know, moderate intensity, long period of time. Fartlek, varying the speed and terrain. Interval, so working for intense short periods with rest breaks. Circuit, moving around a series of stations. Plyometric is that bounding exercise. And weight training, or resistance training as we prefer to call it, where you're working against a given resistance. Similar type of activity, what I want you to do now is see if you can match the method of training to which athlete it would suit best. Pause the video now. Right, let's see how you did. Top continuous training would obviously be suited to a marathon runner where they don't stop during their event and they're working at a moderate pace. Fartlek would be a centre in netball where they're constantly having to change the pace given the situation within a game. Interval training would be a 100-metre sprint athlete where they wouldn't do it back to back. They would have a rest so they can regain that level of energy in order to put the best performance in. Circuit training would be a triathlete. The reason the triathlete would work well for circuit training is because each station could be specific to a component of the triathlon. So there could be some running exercises in there, there could be some cycling exercises in there, and there could be some swimming exercises in there. Plyometric training would be a basketball player. As we know, plyometrics, getting that explosive power, and basketball players obviously need a lot of explosive power in order to reach the basket. And then your resistance training would be your rugby player, where they've got to try and push against a given resistance in a game. Obviously the opposition are going to be that resistance when they're trying to tackle you. So overall then, hopefully you can do the following things, such as correctly identify the 6 methods of training. You can explain in detail and using examples how athletes should undertake each method of training. And you'll also be able to analyse which training would be more suitable to improve specific components of fitness and which sports would be best used for each method there. In the next tutorial we will look at fitness classes, and then we'll start to analyse the positives and negatives of each method of training. So as long as you can answer the 3 questions on the screen now, you'll do well in the assessment which is shortly going to be released for you to complete. As always, any questions please let us know. Apart from that, stay safe and look after yourselves. Thank you.